reducing speed limits to 40 kilometres an hour throughout inner Sydney. It's an interesting thought. It's up to the state government to change the rules. And as we know, there's been a push locally to drive those speed limits lower to 30 kilometres an hour. Lena Huda is a member of the Safer Actions group here in the Illawarra and is online this morning. Lena, good morning to you and thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
What's your reaction to Sydney Council voting in favour of reducing limits down to 40 k's in inner Sydney?
Yes, now it was great to see that they voted for that because, so the background to this, it's 40 kilometers per hour on local streets. So we're talking about all the side streets. We're not talking about, the big arterial roads. And the background to this is around childcare centres in Sydney. There is no, it's nothing like in school zones where you have to drive slower. So actually a child was hit there just in front of a childcare centre, and it was killed by a car going 50 k per hour, and we know that is the deadly speed. And they have reduced speed limits to 40 kilometers per hour. Now they're calling for that, and that makes a lot of sense because in side streets there's really no need to drive, and we're actually arguing for 30 k per hour because that is the survivable speed, and that's also a speed where drivers can watch out and be ready to brake if something unexpected happens, like a child in the side street in front of a childcare center is actually not as unexpected as you would think, and they shouldn't lose their life for drivers having to speed through local streets.
Is 30 kilometres an hour realistic in suburban streets?
Yes, around the world, that's the normal speed limits in side streets. We have 30 k per hour. I'm German, so we have introduced that 40 years ago. So if you look at cities like Munich, 80% of streets have 30 k per hour speed limits. That are all the side streets. And then on the arterial roads, what you do, and, thinking about, where we live in the Illawarra, if you have streets that are busy, then you need crossings, you need footpaths, you need somewhere where the bikes are separated from the cars. It has to be predictable for everybody where everybody is, and then you can have faster speeds. But in side streets, you can't have it like that. You have to think about speeds that are survivable and where people can coexist. So people walking and cycling should be safe, and drivers obviously should also get to their destination.
Do you think that 40 kilometres an hour could be a compromise, given that's already the speed limit through school zones?
No, the reason why it's not really a compromise is because the risk of dying is around double as high at 40 k than 30 k. So the risk of dying goes up almost exponentially above 30 k per hour. And then when we look at travel time, when we think about what matters for drivers, the difference between driving at a maximum speed of 30 k and 40 k is very minimal. So, in Sydney, for example, in the CBD, the last mile speed is only 25 k per hour anyways, because the travel time usually in a city environment is more about intersections, other cars and so on.
Yeah, that's right.
So 30 k is the right speed limit for such an area, and we have the international evidence on that. Is 30 k it should be, but obviously, I support 40 k as the first step to get there. So I'm supporting this motion. But we have to get to 30 k per hour like we see around the world in peer countries.
Do you think, though, if you went to 30 kilometres an hour, that's actually increasing the variable speed limits there are that we all have to adhere to? You do 110, you do 80, you do 90, you do 70. It's up and down. Wouldn't 40 at least be something that most people would know? And then you'd be because of school zones, they're aware of 40. It actually is something that's consistent and that drivers would become used to.
Yeah, that's a good point about consistency. So it should be 30 k should be the default for local streets. And there shouldn't be 40 k school zones. It should be 30 k. That's a global best practice. And then on streets where you have, arterial roads, where you have separations, where you have people walking, the international best practice is 50 k. And then, motorways, for example, is a good example. You can obviously, there's no people there, people outside of cars. So you can have a lot higher speed limits in those contexts. So you can make very consistent ruling, but what you can't have is if, thinking even about streets, we sometimes even don't have footpaths in the Illawarra. You just can't have 50 k speed limits in that context because the risk of dying when hit at an impact speed of 50 k is 90%. And it's only 10% when hit at 30 k. So it's just not something where you can say, oh, we do that. And you can see the effects it has. It means kids are being driven everywhere.
All
Like
right,
it's stunning how much pressure there is on people to drive their children everywhere because we made our neighborhood streets unsafe for them.
Lena, just hold the line for me. We've got a call. Laurie's in Kiama. Laurie, good morning to you. What do you got to say about this?
Yeah, g'day, Pete, and g'day to your speaker. Why don't you just educate people not to walk across the road? Why just use pedestrian crossings and use these rock crosses? Why do people persist on just walking in front of traffic? They're going to get run over. Well, bad luck. Walk where you're supposed to walk.
Is it a case that at higher speeds, drivers might actually have an accident and cause an impact onto a pedestrian?
I don't know. Well, how do you work that out? The only way you're going to hit a pedestrian...
Oh, no, I've seen cars actually veer off the road and actually hit people on the sidewalk.
Well, yeah, but that's a car accident. That's an accident.
Yeah, that's true.
That's not people walking across the street, jaywalking, when they can go 200... Like here, perfect example, Kiama, Tarralong Street and Manning Street, we've got pedestrian crossings everywhere, but they still walk across the middle of the road.
Yeah, interesting. All right.
Yeah, so, and if you hit them, you're in the wrong. But if you hit them on a pedestrian crossing...
You're in the wrong.
Sorry, if you hit, you're in the wrong again. So just walk where you're supposed to walk, for goodness sake. In Kiama, it's an absolute headache. People just walk, tourists, on the weekends, they just walk where they feel like walking.
Yeah, it's called jaywalking. Thanks for your call this morning, Laurie. 1300 973 300 is also our, if you'd like to give us a call. Tim is in Greenwell Point. We'll just take Tim and then we'll go back and have a chat to Lena Huda, who's from the Safer Streets Action Group in the Illawarra. Tim, good morning to you. What do you think? Hello, Tim.
Yeah, hello.
You're on the radio, Tim.
Yeah, hello. I was just saying that our cars are defaulted to have cruise control for safety, and you can't do that under 40 kilometres an hour.
Oh.
So the 40 is the default for our vehicles unless someone wants to reprogram them.
Okay. Would you want cruise control on in the inner suburban streets of anywhere?
I do have cruise so I don't go over the speed limit because it has the cruise that doesn't allow you to go too fast, and it will cruise control from the car in front of me as well.
Okay, all right. So because the radar action keeps you away from the person in front, the vehicle in front.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm with you. Okay.
You can't do it under 40.
Okay, appreciate your call this morning. Thank you. 1300 973 300 is our number if you'd like to call us. Lena Huda is our guest. She's with the Safer Streets Action Group in the Illawarra, who are advocating for a 30 kilometre an hour speed limit. Interesting. What do you think about the idea of vehicles not being able to use cruise control under 40 kilometres an hour, Lena?
Well, within these side streets, you usually don't use cruise control because the idea is really that in those environments where, we should have children walking to school, for example, we should have children riding their bikes, you should, as a driver, be very aware and very ready to brake.
Being
in that
alert,
environment.
yeah.
And then when you go to the arterial roads where you have, that separation and where you have the crossings and so on, then it becomes a more predictable environment. And then, you expect people to cross at the light, for example. But it was really interesting to hear from this caller that, people should be, streets are for everyone. People should be able to walk. It's not just about getting cars around. A lot of people don't drive cars. People, like young people, they don't drive cars. Old people might not be able to drive. So we need to have everybody be able to move around safely. And we don't have crossings everywhere. So we need drivers to be alert and to also, if they see somebody like an elderly person trying to cross the street, they should, give way, this kind of thing, and that makes a better community for everybody. Good communities are not really about people just being inside of cars and getting angry at the few people outside. Good communities are about people being out and about, and we have to make sure that we design our streets for that.
Yeah, well, yes, and it's interesting the first caller talking about educating pedestrians so that they don't walk across and jaywalk. They cross the roads in appropriate places, which is another interesting. I think all of us forget that sometimes. We just get lazy and want to walk across the road where it's convenient to us instead of actually not jaywalking.
In the Illawarra, I wish we actually had enough crossings so that could actually be the thing. In many streets, the crossings are so far away from each other that you have to consider when you walk that is a method of transport that actually takes a lot of energy to get to a crossing. If it's 500 meters away, and if you maybe have a little child with you, or if you're elderly, that's a very long way to go to the next crossing. And that's why people cross where it's convenient. For drivers, on the other hand, it doesn't, to have a little drive a little bit longer. That doesn't really add that much. They don't need so much energy to do that. So I wouldn't even call it jaywalking, because often you see it in areas where the people walking are actually really important. When we think about our shopping streets, the people who walk are actually the people who shop, not the people inside cars.
All right.
So if they have to wait, for example, another problem is we sometimes have to wait forever for a green light on a pedestrian crossing.
Yep.
And that makes people then, the research shows we should have at maximum 30 seconds waiting time, because otherwise they might take risks. And that's not because those humans, they're just humans and they make mistakes, and that shouldn't be deadly. So you have to kind of design for these things that make people want to walk.
All right. Appreciate your time this morning. Thank you. Lena Huda, who's from the Safer Streets Action Group in the Illawarra, talking about a plan to try and have speed limits reduced to 30 kilometres an hour around the region. And Tony's on the line from Picton. Good morning to you. Do you think that's a good idea, Tony?
Not really. I don't think it's relevant to compare European cities with Australian cities. The European cities are narrow streets, they're windy, and 30 kilometres an hour probably makes a lot of sense. But in Australia, it's a different situation. And I'll give you a really good example. The main street of Liverpool, I think it's George Street, they've put a 30 kilometre an hour limit there. It's a wide street. You've got plenty of visibility of the jaywalkers. And I tell you, you're more distracted, trying to do 30 kilometres an hour watching your speed than you would be, if you're doing 40 or 50 down that street, where you can concentrate on, any pedestrians that might jump out at you. So, I don't think it's relevant to compare other cities in Europe with Australia.
All right. Appreciate your call this morning, Tony. Thank you for that. 1300 973 300 is our number. You can always give us a call or text 0467 922 684. Which is exactly what Jeff has done from Sanctuary Point, who says, conversely, pedestrians need to be alert. Yes, rather than actually getting out and about amongst it. Speaking of being alert, Sean has said, great, Peter, so now we have at least 8 speed limits to look out for, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 and 110 kilometres an hour. A re-bonanza for the mobile speed cameras, I'll bet. It's a cynical of it.
Welcome to Sydney, 1983.
It was the hedonistic queer haven.
Come on, people!
That turned dark.
Something is killing gay men.
Are you referring to AIDS?
Where fear was infectious.
Our kids are not safe.
But courage was contagious.
So many of our friends are getting sick.
New ABC drama, inspired by real events.
We have a choice.
In Our Blood.
The world needs beautiful things right now.
Starts Sunday, March 19 on ABC TV and streaming on ABC iView.
This is Mornings with Peter Riley on ABC Illawarra.
25 past 9 on 97.3 ABC Illawarra. Good morning. Peter Riley with you. Yes, you just heard all that in the idea. I shouldn't say that and repeat it. Just looking at the computer screens to try and identify where issues are. We've just had a text in from someone who says there's an accident on Macquarie Pass. It's Ben, and that uphill is closed. So if you're going west, that Macquarie Pass is closed. But we're just putting calls into Transport for New South Wales to see whether the Traffic Management Centre, I should say, to see whether we can get some more clarification on that. The information I'm seeing shows that there is some congestion around Macquarie Pass, at the base of Macquarie Pass. There's also, of course, still congestion on the freeway, basically from Dapto through to past Kanahooka, up through around the Five Islands Road there, and also around the Fangoi Shang Nantian Temple. There's some issues there as well on the road, but there's a fair bit of rain around. Take care, drive to the conditions. If it's heavy rain, then please turn the lights on so other people can actually see you. And just because you're in a large SUV or four-wheel drive doesn't mean that you are going to be able to get through things. Don't drive through floodwater. If it's flooded, forget it. And looking at the radar now, I can see there are some significant, probably moderate to heavy falls that are falling in the region around Wollongong and Bellambi at the moment, through across Port Kembla as well. And I just watched on News 24, Tim Fernandez, one of our journalists who's out at Port Kembla doing a live cross into ABC News on the television, ABC TV News, and he was standing underneath an umbrella whilst it was bucketing down. So it's a fair bit going on out there. Please drive to the conditions. That would be fantastic. 1300 973 300. Looks like we've struck a nerve talking about speed limits this morning. Alice is online. Good morning, Alice. How are you?
Good morning, Peter. I'm well, thank you, and welcome back.
Thank you. I'm only here for a couple of days, which is good because I don't think the chest would be able to deal with it.
We'll be able to deal with it, don't worry. I want to agree with your previous caller that was discussing the European streets. And I agree and concur, with all of that. The suburb streets are narrow. They are cobbled, so it's like driving on gravel. And only the major streets are wider. And even if you go into the major towns where they do put the speed limit up, they're still narrow streets and they're still cobbled. They're not bitumen. They are a hazard to pedestrians, I agree. But our streets are bitumened, they're wider, and our main streets are the 60 Ks, whereas 50 Ks is main, or 40 I would agree to, but 30 is a bit ridiculous.
30 is a bit ridiculous, but 40 you'd think be okay.
I think so, because our streets are far wider.
What about in areas around childcare centres that aren't perhaps covered by school zones?
I think the childcare centres should be covered the same as school zones, but if we're all doing 40 around the suburbs, they would be covered.
All right. Appreciate your call this morning. Yep.